Greetings from Geneva in Switzerland. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to address your session on the digital economy. What I will do is I will share with you some of the main findings of the digital economy report from UNCTAD that was released only a couple of months ago. This report focuses on how to create and capture value in developing countries in the digital economy. The digital economy has great implications for all the Sustainable Development Goals. It is related to frontier technologies like blockchain technologies, data analytics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, Internet of Things, automation and robotics, cloud computing, and electronic commerce. Sometimes digitalization is making it easier to reach the goals. Sometimes it's making it more difficult. And this is why it's so important to consider what are the best policy options to respond to these changes. The digital economy is evolving very fast and in very interesting ways, and it is driven by two main drivers. The first driver is the ability to collect, use and analyze massive amounts of machine-readable information, what we call digital data, about practically everything. Digital data are core to all fast-emerging digital technologies. These data arise from the digital footprints of personal, social and business activities taking place online. As you can see in this slide, global Internet Protocol or IP traffic, a proxy for data flows, grew from about 100 gigabytes per day in 1992 to more than 46,000 gigabytes per second in 2017. And yet this is only the beginning. By 2022, global IP traffic is projected to reach 150,000 gigabytes per second, fueled by more people and things becoming connected to the internet. This makes it important to understand the connection between this data and data flows and value creation. Value is created once the digital data are transformed into digital intelligence and then monetized. This makes access to data increasingly important to be able to transform the data into digital intelligence and extract value from the data. In virtually every value chain, the ability to collect, store, analyze, and transform the data brings added power and competitive advantages. Once data have been transformed into digital intelligence, there are different ways to monetize them, including selling targeted advertising space, as is done, for example, by Google and Facebook, or charging a commission on e-commerce platforms, or simply using data from sensors to improve the productivity and innovation of companies' activities. The challenge, therefore, is to build the sufficient capabilities and scale to transform the data into intelligence and then to find the ways to monetize the data. The second main driver of the digital economy is platformization. Interestingly, the economic geography of the digital platform economy is very different from what we're used to see. We don't have the traditional north-south divide, but rather there are two economies dominating the scene, the United States and China. These two countries account for 90% of the market value of the world's 70 largest digital platforms. By comparison, the share of Europe is only 3.6%, that of Africa 1.3%, and that of Latin America only 0.2%. And this is not the only area in the digital economy where we see the very strong role of United States and China. These two countries account for 75% of all patents related to blockchain technologies, 50% of global spending on the Internet of Things, and more than 75% of the public cloud computing market. The growing power of these digital platforms has various global implications. First, we see an increased market concentration taking place. If I'll give you two examples from Google and Facebook, Google now accounts for about 90% of all the internet searches of the world. In the case of Facebook, they account for 2/3 of all the social media market, and they are the #1 social media platform in more than 90% of the world's economies. You also see the emergence of global data value chains, raising questions as to where in that chain developing countries will find themselves. Issues related to employment are also important, for instance, due to automation and online work, as online labor platforms are growing in importance. They can both open job opportunities in developing countries, but may also give rise to intense competition and risks for a race to the bottom in working conditions. Another area that is getting a lot of attention right now is taxation. It is hard to tax global online businesses. And if you look at the case of Google and Facebook again, we see that about 2/3 of their profits are generated outside of the United States, but about only 10% of the taxes paid by Google and Facebook go beyond the US borders. We can also see traditional sectors being increasingly disrupted by digitalization. We see this in retail, we see it in the financial sector, and we see it in advertising, where increasingly online advertising revenues are dominating the scene. This begs the questions what to do in terms of policies. And we see here that governments have a critical role in shaping the digital economy by defining the rules of the game. But they cannot do this alone. They have to have a very close dialogue here with the private sector, with academic expertise, with civil society and the tech community. And when considering different policy responses, we have to keep in mind that there are still huge digital divides in the world economy. And some new are evolving. For example, only half of the world's population is online. And in the least developed countries, only 1 in 5 people currently use the internet. Within countries, there are also important divides. For example, across the world, there is a big gender divide on the internet. And the biggest gaps in this case are observed in the least developed countries and in sub-Saharan Africa, where the gap has actually widened in the past few years. These and other digital gaps place entrepreneurs and enterprises in low-income countries at a clear disadvantage and makes it more difficult for them to create and capture value in the digital economy. The situation in e-commerce is very illustrative of the digital divide. The extent to which people use the internet to shop online varies from more than 60% in many developed countries to much less than 5% in most low-income economies. So this is a very different reality on the ground when it comes to e-commerce. Policy responses need to explore new pathways for structural transformation and local value creation and capture through digitalization. Unfortunately, there is a shortage of easy solutions, especially that have been tried and tested. A general lack of reliable statistics to support evidence-based policymaking and effective monitoring of progress adds to this challenge. As you can see in this slide, a range of policy areas have to be addressed more or less in parallel. Some of them can be handled at the national level, others require international collaboration. But given that countries are at very different levels of digital readiness, it is very important that whatever international rules are negotiated contain considerable flexibility so that all countries can feel at ease with the solutions. Policymakers face a very difficult challenge when trying to coordinate the many different policy areas, the many stakeholder perspectives, and in view of the very rapid pace of change in the digital economy. So against this background, there is no time to waste. Action is urgently needed. This applies not least to the donor community, which needs to give much more attention to the digital dimension when they're defining and designing their donor development strategies. In this case, let me draw your attention to the Etrade for All initiative. It aims to connect the dots by bringing 30 partnering organizations together to address the many challenges facing developing countries in terms of preparing for the digital economy. It is a very cost-effective way to ensure that we don't duplicate and that we make it more easy and transparent for the developing countries that need assistance to find who can provide that assistance. It is also a very important tool for donors to see what kind of programs are available that they can also help support. With those words, I would like to wish you all the best for your discussion on the digital economy and encourage you to continue the dialogue here in Geneva at the next e-commerce week at the end of April 2020. At that e-commerce week, we will also organize the 4th session of the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on E-commerce and the Digital Economy. And having this kind of dialogue with all member states at the table is extremely important to have an inclusive dialogue and look for solutions to the opportunities that we're seeing emerging in the digital economy. So welcome to Geneva in April. Thank you so much for your attention.